It's hard to believe, but it's been 40 years since I started VP. It really started out of love of racing. It was just that pure and simple. I didn't truly have the money when I was young to go racing myself. It was one of those things that truly started in a parent's garage. You know, you hear those stories all the time, and I wonder how many of them are true. This is an actual one that happened in my dad's garage. The basis of building VP and the knowledge of building VP, I think, happened when I was a child. My dad was a W-2 veteran, and he was in the Army all his life. And towards the end of his career, he had 4 to 6 weeks of summer vacation every year. And we would take trips. But quite a few times, Dad took me to Washington, D.C., wanted to give me the love of country and the history of the country. And I remember on the way one morning, passing the Library of Congress, actually I don't remember passing it. I remember we went by and my dad said, "Is that building over there?" And it was a really blocky building. It was nothing that impressed me as a child. But what did impress me is my dad said, "Everything man knows is in that building. Everything." And I went, well, that's a lot. Everything man knows. And that always impressed me and stuck with me. So when I wanted to start VP, I was interested in fuels because I didn't have the money to go racing. I'd had a little 6-cylinder car, and when you modify 6-cylinder engines real easily, real quickly, you can build compression, a lot of compression ratio, and almost always too much compression. So I became very sensitive to fuels. So playing with a little bit of avgas and regular gasoline and different types of gasolines, I saw there was a difference, and I was pretty fascinated. 20 years after the war, military is off gasoline, they're on the jet fuel. So everything they did in the war was had become declassified. So everything that man knows is in that one building, and you know, there's no internet. This is in the early 70s. There's not even a thought of the internet. There's libraries. I got my dad's pickup and his tents and camping gear. I went into Virginia, went across the river every day into Washington, D.C. So I had a young librarian that gave me piles of declassified information. So I was privileged to have this information when very few, if anybody else, had it. The information was good, it was valid, it was very scientific, it was cutting edge. It was just no longer needed, and I was allowed to look at all this. And I feel confident that I had an advantage on the engineers that sat over the major oil companies. They were focused and fixated on octane. I was focused and fixated on octane and power and fuel economy, surprisingly at that time, which really meant efficiency of using fuel, and that's always important. Efficiency in everything is always important. So I had a background that those boys didn't have, and I had forward thinking that those boys probably didn't have either. I brought all this knowledge back to Texas with me. I had some friends that were in the refining business. They were the sons of the men in the refining business, and I knew through the sons, boys my age, and I knew to ask help. And I had some help from some very good men. I didn't have any financial help, but I had what was way past financial help. I had the ability to be in their labs and talk to their lab guys and their technicians and their engineers. I also had another fortunate thing. I knew David Rear and Buddy Morrison from Dallas. These boys would come along and become 7-, 8-time champions in NHRA Pro Stock, IHRA Pro Stock. I quickly met Bob Glidden and Warren Johnson, and those were the 3 big winners in Pro Stock from the 70s, 80s, up into the early 90s. So I had the background knowledge of the basic research done from the war. I had current knowledge of guys working in the refineries right at that time. I also had young racers in a relatively young sport of drag racing that was changing, and it was an engine sport. We had the place to develop fuels and the guys to test them. It was a great time in the history of racing to be doing what I was doing. And drag racing was a big deal because of what I was interested in. Quite frankly, for a while there, it was all I was interested in, but it was so engine intensive. Then a national champion in motocross, Kent Howerton, lived in San Antonio. Not only lived in San Antonio, lived down the street from me, and we became friends. So through my connection with Kent Howerton, got me straight into factory Suzuki. And our fuels worked excellent. I mean, our C12, which was our leading drag race fuel at the time, was really, really good. And it took quite a few years to come up with something that was substantially better than C12. We have now 15, 20 motorcycle blends that we do, but at the time, we only had that one and a couple of factory ones. But that relationship with factory Suzuki quickly changed to Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and a number of years later, KTM. The technology and motocross engines, which was 2 strokes at the time and evolving into 4 strokes, was rapidly changing, and that was really good for VP because it gave us an education on fuels and engines, and we watched the engines develop, and we could develop the fuels alongside the engines. And then in some of the factory instances of the engines, some of the engines were actually developed around the fuel. After spending about 3 years totally immersed in the factory motorcycle efforts, we started to become a little more diverse in some of our sales guys who happened to be round track guys, road race guys, and actually they got us involved in road racing and round track. You know, one of the guys told me the other day that we have an iconic brand, and I never really thought of ourselves as an iconic brand until I just stopped to think about, we are an iconic brand. We've been around for right at 40 years now. We've had lots of success at every level of motorsports. We have 60 series that we support right now. I think we have 30, 40 blends of fuel that leave VP virtually every day. We probably have 30, 40, 50 more that we do occasionally during the year, or just some of them are just for one time, one application use. We're really good at what we do. And thinking back, are we an iconic brand? Well, we're known over the world, truly known around the world. We dominate our country. We do really well in Europe. We're known in South America, and the boys in China and in Japan, they know who we are too. One of the journalists the other day asked me, when we were at SEMA, asked me, why do we think we're so good? And I didn't know if he was thinking we had an attitude that thought we were so good, but I think we're really good. And why we're good is we care. It's the passion. I hope the passion shows from the entire business. And I know it really does. But we care about what's going on. When we go racing with you and through you. And our employees feel that today. They talk about it on Mondays, about who did what in the world of racing. I mean, truly the world of racing. They get excited about it. And when they're working, putting fuels together, or drumming the fuels, or testing the fuels, or doing the R&D, or I mean, even the guys over in bookkeeping and marketing, they live this stuff. That's one of the reasons we're good. It's not a job. We do make a good living, but it's not a job, it's a passion. And I think that's the big deal. Racing is a passion sport. Well, I guess a lot of sports are passion sport, but this one's really a passion sport. And it runs deep in people. It runs deep in us.
Todo Baja Sur es territorio VP.